game review state. I haven't read game reviews in ages because we already know it's trash. It's been trash for 10 years, 15 years, something like that. I mean, the number one thing that comes to your mind when you think of game review world is, oh yeah, didn't that guy get fired for giving a game a bad review? That just sticks. How can you even give
Yeah.
this whole thing any credit at that point? So
Or
that's what we'll
games
be.
that are complete garbage get high rated.
Yeah, I mean that's just all stems out of the same thing of a guy got fired for giving it a bad rating, and you're paying us, so we better give it a good rating so I don't get fired. We'll start with a little bit of background. I'm Deus. This is Games by Design. We'll be discussing the game review problems that exist today.
Reviewing games reviews, as it were.
Yeah, reviewing the game reviewers needs to be done. Um, I'm a developer amateurly. I do amateur game design, and then I work in software, fixing other people's mistakes.
I'm Rage. Basically the same story. Hobbyist, game designer. Like to spend my time analyzing different games. Big fan of the Souls series. Anything Hidetaka Miyazaki has done is fabulous. Little bit of semi-pro gaming experience under my belt as well, and just a lot of time playing games and trying to figure out how they work.
And our Mr. Videoless.
I go by pseudo typically. I've just been playing games my life. I hobbyist kind of dev a few things, play around with just how everything kind of works. I'm mostly interested in the actual underlying behaviors and functions in games, the way they're designed by that. Basically it for me.
Yeah, another amateur game designer, code jams, game jams, and also a professional developer. So that's sort of where we're all coming from here. We're looking at the code, we're looking at the software, and then we're looking at the game design behind these stuff that current game reviewers don't get. I don't want a 5-paragraph opinion. Pseudo, when's the last time you actually looked at a game review?
I look at them not. I still look at them frequently, but I don't really actually care too much of what they say. It's like a very kind of brief skim, try to find what they actually are trying to like hide or what they're actually trying to say about it. But I haven't really actually like properly, not properly, but I haven't really like taken in and thought about what a reviewer was actually putting out there. It's kind of just like a try to get the general idea. Then no matter really what they're saying, it's mostly kind of just bullshit or kind of paid for.
Basically, you understand that whatever they're saying is absolutely worthless now, and we try to glean some indication of information out of this. So let's just pull one up here. I'm looking at IGN, one of the standards for most people to go to here. Really, everybody knows it. And what do we have? We have a video of a bunch of people playing some action right at the beginning. It really doesn't tell you anything. I mean, at least it'll tell you it's an FPS game, mostly, though this is all cutscene, pretty much. Kind of useless. I'm not buying a video.
Very, very clearly some pre-recorded, some staged gameplay for what they do have in there. It looks very much like a trailer rather than a review.
And we've got paragraphs and paragraphs and TLDR, TLDR, TLDR all the way down. And we've got 8.2 great. Cool. What does 8.2 mean? It's just some arbitrary number. How do you come up with 8.2? The best COD campaign in nearly a decade.
I mean, they're probably correct. It's not saying a lot, but they're probably correct.
I mean, we're talking about a low bar on this one. It's not really a campaign game.
No. These games have sold for their multiplayer for a very long time. The original Modern Warfare is a game that's near and dear to my heart. I love that game very much. One of the games that I played semi-professionally, and it really was like one of the better campaigns for a Call of Duty. But the reason everybody bought it was the multiplayer. Let's be real.
Yeah, you wanted to shoot some asshole in the face. That's why you picked up the game. That's what
I got really good at it.
Yeah, I know. I gotta watch my head around you. And I think I've gone through 30 different review sites in the last couple days, every single one of them is doing this exact same format. And it's useless. It's worthless. We can't get any information out of this. So I'm just going to kill it. Fuck you guys. You're gone. Stop talking to me. I don't want to ever see you ever again. Get off of my website. Let's figure out what a game really... You boil it down. What's your favorite parts of a game? What does a game need to be good? And if you're viewing and you want to follow along, please tell me. What does a game need for you to consider it good?
So one of the things that I would like to lead in with is sort of a in-depth topic, and maybe one that we can touch on again later, but a robust game loop. Like the core game loop being something that you actually want to do repeatedly, rather than something that is shallow and unfulfilling, which you see a lot in sort of more games as a service sort of games, like Anthem, for instance, is a great example of a modern games as a service game, and it just lacks any sort of mechanical reward for playing the game. You don't feel skilled, you don't feel interested. And it ends up just being an unfulfilling experience that ends up driving you towards paying for things, because that way at least you can get a little hit of dopamine when you get that new cosmetic or that new loot drop or whatever.
Yeah, gambling for kids. That's what it is. Gambling for kids.
Well, for anybody with money, really.
Yeah, mostly kids.
No regulation.
Yeah. Gambling that you can do for anybody you want. And we will dig a little bit more into what a robust game loop means later on after we go back through these, because I'm sure there's some people viewing that, I put robust game loop and they're like, I have no idea what that means. So we'll go back. For me, one of the most essential parts, and this used to be listed in like all old game reviews, going way back. Like I'm an old NES gamer, to date me a little bit here. I've been doing this for a long time. And every review back in those days had 3 scores, not just 1. I don't know how we got down to 1. We had 3. They are gameplay, graphics, and sound. Now, those are pretty terrible basic ones, but gameplay, an extent of that is control. And we cannot ignore the control of a game. You can take the best game out there, and if it's got shit control, I don't want to play it. I want to throw it out the window. That's not fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of the things that can drive someone away from a game very, very quickly. Like one of your and my favorite games ever, Bloodborne. If it didn't control as crisply and as smoothly as it does, it would be absolutely unplayable at like the 20 FPS that the PS4 can push on it.
The first game that comes to my mind when I think terrible control, I didn't even have to play it. I just watched somebody, and after she tried playing this game for a while, she turned to me and goes, "I understand the saying, pain in the neck." Because she had been trying to control this game, and it just wouldn't do what she wanted, and her neck was starting to hurt from being like, "Die, game!" And that was The Last Guardian. And anybody who's played The Last Guardian probably had a similar experience. I want the pet to do, what are you doing?
Beautiful game, though.
Yeah, absolutely gorgeous. A good example of how control is just so essential. Pseudo, what's your input here?
I mean, you basically covered it with like a kind of like from game to game it depends, but the basics. But the drilling down into it, it is just gameplay, sound, and graphics.
Oh,
and I'd like to see that stuff kind of come back.
Including the game loop. How good is the game loop itself as opposed to extra content? I kind of like this idea. I wouldn't mind looking at something and going, the game loop is addictive. The rest of the game is pretty good, but the main loop of the game, yeah. And if we can get gamers to understand these terms and understand how games are built, we can help them understand a better review system.
Yeah, for sure. And like, I think, as you mentioned, something that has sort of fallen out of vogue, but is very important, is the sound and presentation. Not necessarily from a technological perspective, because like, take a portable console like the Switch, for instance. It's not a terribly powerful console, but the fact of the matter is it's way more powerful than anything we've had, like portable, or even as a fixed console in your living room for decades and decades. Like back in the Nintendo 64 era, you technically could not achieve a lot of what you can with the Switch.
Oh yeah, I mean, I started in SNES days where voice acting is not a thing. You get chip
But
tunes.
at the same time, the music was so well written, it was so evocative, it brought forward a lot of emotion that I would say, like, for instance, the soundtrack to Chrono Trigger
I was going to
is
put some of that on even as you were talking about it.
the soundtrack to Chrono Trigger, which is one of my favorite soundtracks ever, is something that is just so much more evocative than the overly orchestral stuff. Or to make a more direct apples to apples comparison, the uh, what was the new one that just got remade? Link's Awakening, the original score versus the remastered, very orchestral version that we have now on the Switch. Uh, I find it the remaster version is very pretty, but it's just missing the soul and the drive that you get out of the old sound chips, and that is something that is definitely a big part of how you experience the game, and it's something that can be brought back, but it's something that is often overlooked as part of designing a game.
How do you want me to classify that? I mean, we can call it just sound, because that's essentially what it is, and it's probably the best heading. But we're not talking about, we're specifically talking about how the sound melds into the game. Not just does it have sound, and are they nice sounds, but does it lend to the game's feel? Yeah. I mean, that's basically what sound was back in the day. How good is the sound in this game? It doesn't make me want to scratch my ears out when it plays. Yeah, cool. That every game has voice acting, so I think we can break out sound into. Yeah.
Audio design, or
and we can do a specific one for voice acting.
Yes.
Voice acting deserves to be done by itself.
Can vary by region, can vary by technological importance. Like you were saying, Super Nintendo, the games that you're playing probably didn't have voice acting, and that's fine. They're still great games.
The only SNES game that had voice acting was Final Fantasy VI. I swear I can hear the words in that opera scene.
Yes, so good.
Hey, thank you, Nariel. This is something that's been dear to our hearts forever. We're just sick and tired of it. Let's improve this. Let's make this better right now.
And maybe hopefully get somebody to pay some semblance of attention that maybe games media needs to actually do a little bit of reporting and research and actually think about what they're publishing.
Yeah, I mean, if all of the gamers stand up and say what you're doing isn't acceptable, we want you to do this better, they will, because we are their market, we are their money, and if we're not giving them money, they have to do something else.
Because they want the money. The games industry wants all of the money in the world.
Every corporation wants all the monies. That's it. That's their job. They're legally bound to suck every penny out of your pocket that they can.
Although I would, and this is straying off topic, I will say, the AAA industry has jumped the shark a bit.
Yeah. Yes, you are absolutely right. Absolutely right. If you were to go to any designer nowadays and say, hey, I need you to make a 30-hour classic game on 2 megabytes. No. That's not possible. I can't even give you an asset that's 2 megabytes, okay? Yeah, so what's really happening that what we see is you used to have to focus on control, on gameplay, on story, because these are what set you apart. You only had so much memory to make graphics. Now everyone can focus on graphics. They spend so much time and money on that, they forget that games are supposed to be fun. And that's the crux. Do we have a fun genre? Do we want to just like fun?
Just have fun as a heading in a review?
I mean, it's pretty arbitrary. it's the most arbitrary thing that I would have on the list.
I
But
feel
can
like
you
it should be
quantify fun?
one of the like leading topics, or maybe in the middle somewhere, just because it's one of those things that's so subjective. Like, I would say that The Witcher 3, for instance, is a phenomenal game. It is excellent. It has wonderful audio. It has great sound. The voice acting is generally very well done. But
Beautiful,
I
deep
didn't find
world.
it terribly fun. Just didn't find it super engaging.
I'm unfortunate, and I've had a few people just tear me apart. What? You didn't like The Witcher? I found an enemy. Here's my experience with The Witcher, and a game experience. So, Rage, would you replay Witcher 3? Nariel asks.
That's a good question. I think it would be one of those games that I would have to sit down and force myself to play. And oh yes, that's a good question as well, and I'll address that just as soon as I'm done this point. It's one of the games that I would have to. Witcher 3 is one of the games that I would have to force myself to sit down and just slog through the story, because I care about the characters, because I think that they're very well written, but not a game that is mechanically satisfying for me to play. It feels to me very shallow, and that ties into your next question, which is that, something that has high replay value is therefore fun, which is a statement that I generally disagree with. It's something like a game that is very fun has a lot of replay value by virtue of the fact that it is very fun. The games that try to artificially give themselves a lot of replay value by having, infinite loot drops, or a
Multiple
big end game
endings.
grind, or oh yeah, a whole bunch of endings that you have to, take different paths through the game to get. That is interesting, and if it meets these other criteria, like having a fun core gameplay loop, being nice to look at, helps, having good audio that doesn't hurt your ears, that is very helpful. It allows you to organically go back and play those games over and over again and continue having a ton of fun with them. But if it doesn't meet those criteria, having those other endings, and say you're the kind of person who really loves to be completion-y in a game, you want to complete that game, you want to get the 100%, it means that you have to spend a lot of time slogging through, because you're not really enjoying what you're doing. It's just a grind. It has become work. It is no longer playing a game, because as Deus alluded to earlier, people have forgotten that games are supposed to be fun.
And like I said, fun is really subjective. Like what I find fun, I'm sure some people don't find fun. I'm a masochist. I like souls. Yeah, we like getting killed. If I play through a whole game and I haven't died, I don't really want to do that again. There was no challenge. There was nothing got my blood pumping. But that's not
That being
everybody.
said,
That's not everybody.
a challenge does not make a good game.
Nope.
Like
Nope.
Journey,
Not in and
for
of itself.
instance. Journey is not challenging. It's not difficult. It's very short. Doesn't have a whole lot of gameplay to it, but it's fabulous. It's a wonderful game.
So there's replay and there's have to just keep playing because story isn't fun. Yeah, exactly. I keep playing the game over and over and over and over again because I love this game and I find great satisfaction in playing it. I may have done the same thing in the game 50 times. That's not considered replay value. You're doing the same thing over and over again. So those games actually might not even be called high replay value. But because it's so fun, you will play it over and over and over and over and over again. Whereas if a game is designed to, like, you can't just play it once and see everything. You have to play my game 10 times to get everything in it. It's not necessarily fun. It's just they've designed it so you need to keep playing in order to see everything. That's artificial replay value is what we're calling it.
There is one game that I can think of that bucks that trend. It was definitely designed to be one of those games that you have to play a bunch of times in order to get all the content out of it. But each playthrough is sufficiently different while remaining mostly the same, and the core gameplay loop doesn't really change, and it's not super engaging. But I loved it anyway, and it's Near Automata. I thought that game was fabulous, and I did finish all of the endings.
Everybody keeps telling me to play it. Maybe I'll have to do it on my stream one day.
I don't honestly. I don't think you'll like it.
Yeah, unfortunate. I tried. I did the demo, and I'm just circling around the boss and shooting him in the one spot over and over and over and over and over again, and he died, and that was the demo. I was like, yeah, that was when I was playing Witcher 3 too. I think I went back to Witcher from there.
Yeah, I had a hard time with Witcher 3. I wanted to like it. I did.
I tried. What turned me off on it was the weapon durability system. That killed me. It just killed me. Couldn't do it anymore. Got to the northern areas of the first sort of area you explore, and there's a high level zone up there, big forest, and I found some red level giant stone golem thing. I was like, I'm gonna kill this fucker. Threw my shield on, dancing around him, swinging my sword everywhere, going at him. All of a sudden, sword's broken. He was still at 20% health. Now what? Run! Yeah, that was when I stopped playing. It was actually right there.
Yeah, when they put a wall in front of you that you just cannot cross without some sort of MacGuffin, some mechanic that they haven't given you yet.
We're gonna divide these into gameplay, audio, and video for the old categories. Not Vizio, thank you.
What do you mean it's not a TV?
Remembering how to type. Typing is good. So gameplay control, audio design is under audio. Bold you guys. Make sure everybody can tell that these are not members. There we go. Ooh, not what I wanted either.
So there's an interesting thing that I've just noticed here. None of us have had contributions that are in the video category.
Yep, that's exactly why I just sorted these out. Because video does need to be judged. It does. It does. There are terrible, terrible, terrible graphic games out there. But a high level of audio or video does not a good game make. Right? It can be the prettiest game out there and still be shite. So what's important in video, I would say, is style.
Yes, definitely. Style, art direction, like having a cohesive world that feels like it all fits together.
Yeah, it's all about the cutscenes. Everything is cutscene. I want to play that game for 2 minutes. Actually, you know what? Final Fantasy 14. That game is a cutscene.
Also, Final Fantasy 15 and most of 13's and most of 10 and.
No, 10 was a lot of gameplay. 10 had some pretty scenes, but it was a lot of gameplay.
I don't know, man. The laughing scene.
Yeah, I'll always remember that scene. That's a classic.
No, that scene is, anybody who's played Final Fantasy X will never get that scene out of the mind.
But yeah, style. And I'm not saying that a particular video style is good. You know, some people don't like a game for a certain style of animation. Some people do like a game for a certain style of graphic. And that's fine, and that's arbitrary. You know, we cannot review games based on this, people. Stop with your arbitrary shit, and let's figure out ways to properly do it. Like WildStar. A lot of people hated the graphic style in WildStar. But if you dig down into it, the animation was smooth, everything was consistent, everything fit together, and it was just a super, super fun game. Very sad that that one died.
So it's one of those, like, the art direction did its job very well, but you just didn't like the way that they chose to do the art style.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's fine. You know, people can go ahead and say I didn't like a game because of it. They can't say it was a bad game.
Yes.
And that's the line we have to draw here. People have to start understanding that just because we say something is good, something is bad, we're not saying it's a good or bad game. Even if it's a poorly designed game. Like, one of the biggest arguments I get from like the average person, I'm out on the streets, video games come up and they ask me my opinion. That never goes well.
Feel you
I'll,
there.
I'll be like, oh yeah, oh, you like that game? And they'll ask me my opinion. Like, yeah, you know, I didn't like this, I didn't like that, and you know, little critiques on the game. And they're like, but it was a great game. I had so much fun with it. I'm like, okay, step back. You had fun does not mean it was great game. There are some terrible games out there that I enjoy. And I'm not going to call it a good game. I just enjoy it. It's like music. I always make the same music reference. Just because you were young and you rocked the shit out of Spice Girls does not mean they were a good band. You can go ahead and have enjoyed their music all you want. They were not a good band.
That being said, there's nothing wrong with being like super into J-pop. Just saying.
K-pop, on the other hand, get the fuck out. No. No, we're not judging anybody for their musical taste or lack of taste. Fortnite, I can honestly say, never played Fortnite. Thank you.
Yeah, it's not a style of game that attracts me, but I also think that it's probably fine. Like, it's probably competent.
Yeah, I do know about the game. I understand how it plays. I dig the adding of the building to create a depth to the game within the totally overdone, you know, um, Battlefield
Battle Royale.
battle royale style games. Which the battle royale doesn't really appeal to me. I'm not an FPS person. That's Rage. Pseudo is an FPS. Pseudo, you've played Fortnite, I assume.
A little bit, not too much. Was more into PUBG and that kind of stuff.
Oh, so we do have a Battle Royale player.
So
Yes.
what's your input there? We're getting into battle royale. We're gonna make you talk some now.
That is fine. Battle Royale. I'll just compare, I guess, what I've had from PUBG to Fortnite, the other ones. Uh, Fortnite, it's alright. I think it was the whole free to play thing, the design choices that come with that. But distinguishing themselves with the building and the just kind of the controls they have, like it basically plays almost completely different from a PUBG match.
That extra layer of depth that comes with the building, I'm assuming, is something that would be very much appreciated over a game with a somewhat lackluster game loop like PUBG. Like PUBG's gun handling, and feel free to correct me because I've played like 3 matches of PUBG ever. But I found its gun handling to be a little lackluster, a little inaccurate, which is going back to our control argument under gameplay here, and that really killed the game for me.
Yeah, it's gotten better, but especially at launch when it first started, it was not great at all. The biggest thing comparison between the two was mostly the first person only that PUBG allotted, and with the people I played with, we liked that kind of restricted visibility,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of it's a lot slower than Fortnite is. It's not like it's casual. It's just you kind of are jumping around a bit more. You're building stuff up. You're kind of peeking around. It's a bit more fast paced. Where with PUBG near the end, you're basically everything is very intense, but also slowed down, and you're just kind of your heart's just beating. You're just kind of sitting there waiting for someone to show up. You're just trying to move your position, and even just that small of a change of just being able to build something completely changes the dynamic of like the last kind of minutes of a battle royale game.
So have you played Apex Legends?
I haven't yet, actually. It was one I was meaning to, but I haven't really played many battle royales. And I found that if I keep playing them a bit much, I get kind of stressed out. I get way too into it, and then I start getting like heart palpitations and shit.
Yeah, I get that. That was my jam back in my my shooter days. But the thing that actually attracts me to Apex is the fact that it is made by Respawn Entertainment, and this is showing my bias that the gameplay loop and the controls in games designed by the people at Respawn, who are ex Infinity Ward employees who made Modern Warfare, which is one of my most favorite games ever, uh, just end up being super tight, super well controlling. Everything feels great, and I just haven't got a chance to play it yet. So I was curious to see if it's actually any good.
Yeah, I've been meaning to check that out as well. Like especially a lot of these games, when you go just from a control standpoint. Like I've played a lot of DayZ and its
Mhm.
alpha and beta days, and like off that engine, those guns do not feel good. You feel like you're always in like mud, always looking around, over aiming at guns. You'll have no idea where you're shooting. You're like, I'm gonna shoot in this direction. It's like I have no feeling for where this goes. But like you find with properly designed FPS games, once you get used to it, you kind of have like an intuitive sense of, this is where my bullets are going to go, and I look at them. It comes down to even just the like Counter Strike spray patterns and stuff like that. Where when you first play it, it seems like it's random, but the more you play, the more you kind of get used to it, and kind of intuitive. When you start aiming, you'll just kind of, follow the anti pattern.
I'm glad you
And
hit on the word random there. Seem random, because I was waiting for a segue to bring this up. It reminded me of this, and it's something that we need in our gameplay review. RNG.
Oh yeah,
How
yeah, that's a
much
very good point.
how much RNG is there in these games? Because that is the number one thing to kill a good competitive game.
Crazy.
DayZ is what crazy murderers play. Too much social freedom. I don't
games
know.
are really
That
good.
might be what was that horror one? 7 Days to Die, or
Um,
that's quite a
yeah,
So,
sociopathic game
so
too.
what you're saying is it is the Camaro of video games.
Your mustache must be this large to play DayZ.
Oh shit! Does that mean I can play?
No, you've got the beard, not just this brings it out. This is okay. Just the mustache. Rapist. Sorry, it happens.
There we go.
Daisy is one of those games though where it's like terrible. It's like on its own, it's completely terrible. But give it a few friends and the right environment, it could be hilarious and very entertaining.
And
Even
that
though it's
just
like, at
that
least when
just
I was playing it, it was completely broken. But it's like, it's still fun. I wouldn't give it like a rating high, but like at a fun level, I would be like, yeah, you know what? I sunk a decent amount of hours into this.
And
there.
that's a very good point as well. Like there is totally a place in the market for a more casual, less hardcore game. That does not make it bad. That just
Absolutely.
means it's not aimed at you.
Yeah, yeah. There's casual gamers. There's a lot of people out there that are terrible at games, and the only thing that they don't want to do in a game is die. Fine, there's games for you out there. That's just not my game.
Yeah.
But
Just
RNG, we're not even necessarily saying games are good or bad based on the RNG. But is there RNG in the game on this
how is
heading?
it used? Is it
Where is the
overused?
RNG? Yeah, this is something that a lot of gamers, they take very dear to heart, especially competitive gamers. Competitive gamers will judge their games by how little RNG there is, and that almost killed one of the Counter-Strike versions for a while. They released one where they've randomized the spread patterns on the guns in one of their patches, and all the pro players went, "I'm done."
Yeah, that was what 1.7, I think. They added random spread to the guns, and everybody just walked away from the game because they needed to be able to predict what was going to happen. Because it really is a very high skill ceiling game.
Yep, yep. Yeah, that's why I lose.
That game's hard, man. Like I played a lot of shooters. That game is hard.
I didn't play enough shooters when I was a kid. That's why I'm not good. See, Pseudo got old enough to start playing shooters. By the way, Pseudo's my brother, everyone, and he's why I don't like shooters. You try
I got
losing
good
to
at
your brother who's 10 years younger than you multiple times in a row and keep playing that game. You're not gonna. You're gonna be like, I'm gonna go back to the games I win at.
I said, no, I'm go back to the JRPGs. I know how to do this.
It was MMOs for me at that time. I was raiding in WoW at the time, raid leader, guild leader, running a couple guilds on the server. Yeah, that was a full-time job. I didn't have time to get good at Twitch shooters.
Oh, you didn't even have time for Souls games. They weren't even on your radar.
Nope. Yeah, it wasn't until I met Rage here that he introduced me to. I always kind of saw them as another character action game. That's just all they were to me. Until you play it, that's what it looks like. Until you play it, that's what it is. And then you play it and you're like, oh wait, this game is genius. But let's get away from that a little bit more and dig a little bit more into, like, you notice we're building out gameplay here. Video is basically style.
I mean, I don't have a lot to say about the visuals in a game. It's one of the. It can be very important to building the feel of a setting in a game, but it's one of the less important aspects for me.
But although animation is a very good point. Yeah. It's got to be smooth.
I think it's one of those things that gets kind of underappreciated because it feels like what happens is you don't really notice it until it's bad, and then it's the only thing you can notice. So a game can be solid, but if the character animations are terrible, or let's say like a first-person story-driven game, let's say most Bethesda games, and you start looking at this character who is speaking, and it just looks ridiculous, it can kind of be super jarring on the overall experience.
Yeah. Mass Effect Andromeda, anyone?
Nariel brings up a very good point. There was a game that came out recently called Ashen, and it was just the style that they chose made it very difficult to sort of visually grok what was going on screen, and it was a action RPG that had very punishing combat in it, and that difficulty getting the message across is something that can be a serious problem, especially if you've got people who are colorblind or color deficient. I don't know where I'm going with this, but I guess style is important.
Animation as well. But yeah, it doesn't have to be the most beautiful, but yeah, absolutely, you have to be able to get your point across, your image across, the feel across. I mean, from a static viewpoint, I don't mind the animation style in the game. Everything seems to fit the look and feel.
Oh yeah, the art style is beautiful, but as a game, it became the palette was just so samey and everything was so flat that it was very hard to pick out what was an enemy, what was part of the background, what was a path that you could walk on, etc.
I understand. It's an equivalent of things I've seen in JRPGs at times where, like you could really tell a JRPG's quality in the early days, like the SNES days. If you walk into a town and there's a character for your party there, and they look like every other NPC in the town, it's probably not going to be a very good game. Yeah. But if you walk in and you look at that sprite and you're like, they're joining me! Yeah, those are usually well-done games.
That one is going to be a party member.
Yeah, that's what you want. Which, I think we need to expand this. I don't think this is big enough. I think we're missing something vital here.
Oh, yes. Yes, that is very important.
It doesn't fall under gameplay. It's not audio, it's not video. But without it, it's the difference between Final Fantasy and a game you've never heard of.
Speaking of this,
the difference between Final Fantasy, say, 6 and 8. Or 2.
Yeah, 2 is weak. We don't talk about
2 is not.
Let's be clear. J2. Let's say J2. So
yes.
that there's not a bunch of people out there going, 4 was amazing! Because that's 4. It was R2, but that's 4.
4 was fantastic. That was a wonderful game.
Yeah, when we talk FF numbers, we're talking J numbers. Gets too confusing with US numbers.
And on the note of writing, campy writing or like self-aware, intentionally bad writing, I would say is not a knock against a game.
No, not at all. I love bad movies. Absolutely love bad movies. Terrible movies. And I mean, come on, look at your shirt. Stand up.
Oh yeah.
That's good writing right there. Roberto! Yeah.
One of my favorite moments in that game is knocking the knight off the bridge. Poor Roberto's father, who shall remain nameless.
For those that are unaware, that is a Sekiro reference. I have a video on my channel of me killing the armored knight. I suggest watching it. Absolutely hilarious moment in the game. But yeah, writing. I mean, we have to quantify it. It's essential to a good game. Essential.
So things that would make me consider a game to have good writing would be like ability to immerse oneself in the world, the ability to be drawn in by this universe.
I think that's more than writing. That's like an X factor of immersion that is a combination of audio, video, writing, and gameplay. Because they're all required to be properly immersive.
It falls apart without the writing. I can deal with bad audio. I can deal with bad graphics. I can deal with a somewhat inconsistent art style. But without good writing, I am completely uninvested in the game. Like the original Final Fantasy 13, the first one, the writing for the characters was so bad that despite the fact that the game was beautiful, especially for the time that it was released.
Yeah, that's the one thing I will say about the game. Pretty game for its era.
And the gameplay I enjoyed. I know you didn't enjoy the combat. But the writing for the characters was so uninspired and so uninteresting that I completely checked out of the game before I got to the part where the combat really took off.
Yeah, that's probably the biggest problem that I had too then. I mean, I got decently far into the game. Far enough to get a good grasp of the combat, but I just didn't care at all.
Nariel's on point. Hope being the worst character of Final Fantasy 13.
You see, the game was so poorly written that I don't even remember the characters' names except for Lightning because they keep shoving her in my face.
Well, that and the but you would probably remember Hope if you heard these lines. He's the whiny.
Oh, it's a he.
Yes.
I don't know. Yeah, I got all fired up here too. Let me take one of those. Not what you're taking. I got my own here. What would you call it though? How do we quantify writing? How do we review the writing of a game in a scientifically way that we can break it down and actually compare game to game? Because you know, you got to be able to compare it. We have to be able to say this game's writing is better than this because otherwise we're no better than IGN. We're just another opinion spewer, and we might as well, you know, go vomit all over the toilet or something.
I think it's trying to find the game's intention with its writing, and then how well they met that intention. Because it can be campily written and purposely like that, but if that's the intention and they did it well, then I would say the writing is good. If they were trying to go for a more serious tone and the writing is so awful to the point where it's campy, then I would say that it's probably not as good as that, and they fail to meet the requirements, and then overall it becomes
I'm 100% with you. So, what's a well-written campy game?
Give me a second to think about this. Like, for the intention of being campy?
Yeah, with the intention of being campy.
Chrissy brings up a very good one, which is probably very much intended to be campy, is the Metal Gear Solid series.
Some of
them. Yakuza series is not too much campy, but it's very over the top and hilarious.
I would call that campy.
It's done so in a really, really, really good way.
I would call that one campy, yeah. So, there's a good campy one. Now, let's take a classic like 6, which is unvaried fantastic writing, or Chrono Trigger. Let's go with Chrono Trigger. Chrono Trigger is some of the best writing of any game I've ever played. That's why it's so good. The combat's pretty good, the boss mechanics are great, but what brings it all together is the writing. It's an adorable game. You can't help but love it. You will get attached to the characters before the end.
And there's not a single character that you will feel like is out of place, like that you don't fall in love with.
So, what do these two games have in common with their story that we could quantify?
Oh man, as somebody who is not a literary person, this is the more difficult part of the process for me. But I would say probably the conveyance and how close they get to their intent is one of the most important things. Like, if you're setting out to do something and you accomplish it, then I think that's like your baseline.
Yeah.
If you don't meet that baseline, then you're kind of hooped.
Yeah, I'm with you. So I think really just conveyance, yeah. The ability to convey the story and feeling that you want to. You don't have to want to convey emotions, but if you want to convey emotions, you better convey them, or your writing's shit. Is basically, I think, what we're breaking down here. And to put that into a next level, Bloodborne.
Oh man.
The only game to ever convey emotion with game mechanics.
Yep. Well, no, not the only one, but probably one of the best examples.
Okay, the best one too. I'm sure others have. Yeah, I guess a few of the other horror games tried to. Bloodborne.
Like Amnesia, for instance, I think did a pretty good job of conveying emotion through game mechanics. It very much gives you a sense of helplessness because you really cannot do anything against the monsters that are chasing you. Your only interaction with the world is the ability to pick up an object and look at it, or to shine light. That's it. That's all you can do. Other than that is just running away.
Don't worry, it's legal here.
But back to the point on Bloodborne. One of my favorite things about the design of that game is the fact that it has the rally system. And for those of us who haven't played Bloodborne, the rally system is a mechanic by which, upon taking damage, you are given an opportunity to get that health back by striking the enemy, by dealing damage of your own. So it encourages you to play much more aggressively. And in the situation of the Bloodborne setting, you're in a state where you have been infected with the blood of the beast. And this beast is aggressive. It hunts down the citizens, it terrorizes the town. And thematically, that really helps cement like this mechanic of, I need to hit them back so I can get my health.
There was traditional healing methods in it as well. It's just so everything that they do, everything FromSoft does, is deep to a level beyond what most people look at it. And you can continue to dig in and continue to dig in and continue to dig in, and we can start doing a dissertation about the story and what the mechanics mean to the story and stuff like that. But this isn't a Bloodborne stream. But
although there will be one in the future.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. You know, we'll talk for 8 hours about Bloodborne, and we will still have more to say. I don't even remember where I was going anymore. Like Xenogear. Combos are always fun. Yeah, I agree. How do we break down combos? That's combat system?
I would say that's a...
You know, not every game has to have combos, but if we were wanting to mention combos and include combos in our review of a game that has them, where do they go? What are they?
I would say that's part of your core gameplay. That's something that is like, if you have combo A, B, and C, you have a situation in which you want to choose either A, B, or C and apply them to an enemy. Like Devil May Cry, for instance. Very, very popular, very spectacly, very pretty character action game that is focused almost entirely around different styles of combos that you can do, and being able to apply the correct one is the point of the game. That is your core gameplay. That's what you're going to be doing over and 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 over. You're going to be comboing things to death.
So I think, we don't have to keep this to a minimum number. Games are complex things. I don't think we need to call it, we put it down. We said we'd come back to it. I think it's time to come back to this. We're just going to strike this out entirely. I'm going to showcase how terrible I am with, you know what, I'm just going to delete it. There we go. It's gone, but it's coming back.
What have you done?
But what is a core gameplay loop? So to the viewers that are uninformed about game design and programming, so a program happens here, it starts here, it reads here, it goes, and it's done. Reads the top, ends at the bottom. And games you play and play and play and play and play, and they never end until you tell them to end. This is why we call it a loop. In the code, we're start game, and until the player says quit game, we're just going to sit here and loop around in the code over and over and over and over again. So that's what we're talking about, is the core of a game that makes it itself, basically. The combat, the movement, all of that is part of that loop. But how can we break it down to allow a person to understand this and to actually give some values to these without having to teach all of the gamers in the world how to program?
Well, I think the key is in the fact that we differentiate it by saying gameplay. Like it's a gameplay loop. It's the thing that you're going to be doing over and over. And at the risk of sounding very much cliched and like a car reviewer, soul.
I think we can pull combat out and stick combat in its own category. That's something that
but
you
not
can.
all games have combat.
Yeah, see, I told you we would explain you something, and now you've learned something, and that is the crux of all of this. If nothing else happens, for the rest of this stream, I taught you something, and I'm happy with that.
Would mechanics be an appropriate term for the controls and combo kind of combination?
Sorry, say again? I missed the beginning.
Mechanics, the term mechanics. Like the game's actual mechanics, it's kind of a nice blend between its control and if they had the gameplay of combos, that would just kind of be the.
So how are we?
I
agree that it can be approached from the mechanics viewpoint. I think most people understand the term mechanics now, especially like MMO players and stuff totally understand what a mechanic is by this point. But how can we quantify mechanics?
I would say it would be more focused around, and it's hard to do this without using the word feel, which is going back to the whole reason that we don't like the opinion pieces to start with. But say measuring input delay to keep to say, this game's controls feel tight and responsive, doing something like measuring enemy response times. I don't know.
I think that what you're talking about is more under controls to me, and that's responsiveness.
But controls are a mechanic.
Yeah, but we've broken out control in itself because it's such a massive part of gaming and an in-depth mechanic of itself that it can warrant its own score, and it's something that you would want to see right away on your review. Like, there will be some people that won't even look at the rest of the review. They'll look at the control score, and if the control in the game sucks, they might not even read the rest of it. I think it's a good metric to have, and it's very easy to judge and figure out. Yeah, The Last of Us, I didn't like the control.
Yeah, absolutely hated it. Wonderful game. I love watching that game.
Yeah, the game is a fantastic movie.
Wonderful movie. I
If
hate
you've
playing
never
it.
played The Last of Us, watch somebody play it on Twitch. You'll enjoy it a lot more than they will.
True fact. But that's, I don't know, that's my experience with Naughty Dog games in general. I don't know. This is one of those things that I feel like is somewhat left out of reviews because it is difficult.
Which one?
Uh,
Mechanics?
Describing the mechanical strengths and weaknesses of a game. It's something that is more difficult to tackle. It's something that is less obvious, a little less opaque and in your face. But if you are able to dive deeper into a game and really understand why things work the way they do, it can bring you to a whole new level of enjoyment. But
I'm really, it's how well do the mechanics complement each other? I think is the crux of it, the bottom line.
yeah, mechanical cohesiveness, that's very important. Going back to Bloodborne again,
Yeah,
just because it's a comfort zone and I know a lot about it.
and it's a grand example.
Yes, absolutely. Mechanical cohesiveness of the healing potions, the rally mechanic, the hunter's dream as the hub of the game, all are cohesive and make sense within the world that you're in, and you complement each other to build the atmosphere.
Yeah, that's
So
that's
maybe
one of the claims
mechanical
of.
cohesiveness is what we're looking at here.
I don't want to say it mechanical, single. Mechanic cohesiveness. Yeah, there we go.
Just make it as many characters as possible. Mechanical cohesivity.
uh, but um, but that is important. That is important. You want the different functions of the game to all make sense to the game. And then within this, now you've got, maybe a teeny tiny blurb of explanation written down below it within the review, defending your decision on that score. What mechanics stuck out as being poor or not fitting well, and things like this. You're no one's ever going to get a perfect score on this kind of stuff, and that's the way you want it. There should never be a 10. There's no such thing. Because if you call
Yeah,
that game 10, then the next game can't be better.
there is
I
no
really-
perfect video game.
Yep.
I always thought of like, especially for ratings and stuff like that, when it comes to tens, um, I think it should always be with the intention of like a snapshot in that time of when the game was reviewed, how well it. I've always don't like the idea of not having the possibility of getting to a 10. It seems kind of like, well, what's the point of having any kind of cap? And the
Well, I
fact
mean,
that like,
that's a whole nother topic entirely. Should we do away with number ratings? And I would say generally yes.
I I think a quantitative number is still a handy thing to have for, listing, sorting. It can be a easily defended number, hopefully, in many of these cases, like voice acting. High, medium, low is too vague. Yeah, that's 1, 2, 3. I would want at least 10.
Color scores, yes. This game is plaid.
I'm feeling like a mauve game today.
Just think of how much more descriptive the world would be.
So yeah, how do you want to quantify these then? What
Well,
sort of a level? What sort of a score?
it would video games, much like other forms of art, are very difficult to quantify.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't say like go around saying, "Oh yeah, the Mona Lisa, that's like a solid 9.8 out of 10." Like what?
No, but there are things you can compare them on still. Different
Right.
masteries of different styles and techniques and the consistency of the style. You can't really talk about aesthetic appeal and stuff like that because that's an opinion. When you looked at the picture, did you like it? That's all that matters for that. That's not a rating. Games
Exactly. And
games are a little
that's my
different.
point.
You know, they're
I don't think that art needs a number associated.
I agree with that, and we're not trying to judge the artistic values of the game. That's not part of a review. That's why,
Isn't it
like,
though?
I don't think so. I think we should really be looking more at the mechanical styles, and those can be made into art, which some people
I,
do masterfully, but it doesn't
I
have to
think
be.
I think unfortunately, it kind of comes down to the game itself too, right? Like, we kind of bring back the intention thing. If the game is intending to be art and only art mostly, let's say like a kind of a more beautiful game such as like even like Journey and stuff like that, where it's like yeah, our intention is to make a very beautiful experience to go through, and then it just didn't. It would be kind of different than a game that was like yeah, it's kind of more of a platformer, exploring with friends, but it doesn't look that great, but we kind of met the standard.
But even those types of games can all be compared together on control, animation, voice acting, writing conveyance. That's why we're trying to get these topics.
Yeah,
I want
I
these
was
as
mostly
vague
just
as possible.
trying to bring up kind of like weighting the different kind of topics depending on the actual underlying not too much genre, but also kind of bring up intention a lot too. Where like if the intention for this game or this genre was to do this category very well, then I think that has some merit to it compared to comparing it to another game that has similar controls but was going to a different direction and was focusing on different kind of aspects of their gameplay.
I'm just gonna totally take over this.
The spreadsheet just keeps growing, man.
Yep, that's why it's there. That's what I wanted. But yeah, like part of what I'm trying to do in this is figure out topics that literally can apply to all games. That's why we're trying to be so vague. Like games are very, 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 very widespread, but there are certain things that are innate to all games.
And I agree. And I like Pseudo was saying, certain categories are less important to certain styles of games,
Totally.
which makes it again feel weird to me to be giving like a weighted score to any of these categories, just sort of as their own independent thing, outside of is it competent? Because like if it does the thing, then yeah, check mark.
Yeah, yeah, that's and with a lot of these, it's kind of what we're getting down to with these finite nitty-gritty scores, like control. You know, can you control it properly? Is essentially the crux of this one, and this is an instant key. This is something we should be ranking and scoring games on. I really, really like animation because animation is something pretty much every game has. Most of them aren't just still screens anymore. And
No, unless you go back and play like Mist.
yeah, it still did scene transitions and stuff like that. And there was little things that would move little bits on. I wouldn't give it a great score for animation, but I wouldn't give it a terrible score. It wasn't
But then
beautiful, but it
how would
didn't
you
look
roll that?
bad and it got the point across. I'd give it like a
Which I would say
6.
is a check mark for consistent style. Like
Yeah.
totally, they did
Yeah.
a great job.
Yeah, consistent style, like a good 9. An 8,
And
9.
I do think that Mist is a wonderful game. Just to
It
get that
is. It is a
out of the way.
fantastic game.
Um, but again, I would have a hard time saying that Mist based on the time that it came out and based on like the context of other games that it was placed against when it was released is not necessarily a full check mark, a full 10 out of 10. But then if you look at, say, the remake of Shadowgate, then the remake of Shadowgate is much prettier. It has much more animation. It's much more interactive than Myst, or even the original Shadowgate. But if you look at it in the context of like when the Shadowgate remake was re-released, well, not re-released, but released, uh, it very much falls flat compared to a lot of the larger budget games, which then, I don't know, it's weird. I don't like number scores for games.
Well, let's see if we can convince you otherwise by
Yeah, see
coming
if
up
you
with
can convince me otherwise.
by coming up with a system that we can look at some of those old games and give them scores on these and have you actually agree with it just by us coming up with granular and finite enough topics.
I fully admit to being able to have my opinion swayed. I just have yet to see a system that is strong enough that would make me think that having a number score is good. So let's do.
My number one argument for having a number score is so that if I want a game that's good in maybe a particular area, or there's a game, like I said, it's all about when you're coming down to the score. When we're doing the scores here, okay, let me give an example. Like when you're talking about control, if we're playing an old game where you push the button and the character moves, and you push the button and the character moves, but the game is a little bit slower. It's separated into blocks by design. That's what it's reading. It's actually pretty easy to control. You can get to the point that you want to get to. I would give that still a pretty good score in control. It controls well.
Yeah, and I think you've hit on a very important piece of information and context that I had dropped out of my head because I've been so busy thinking about the way games are reviewed in the modern day. And it's that you don't need to have just one final score for a game.
No, no. I don't like the general. I don't mind a general overall score as a vague reference, maybe a totaling or a semi-averaging of some of these. You know what? But even when you do that, if one score is really low, it could just make the whole game unplayable and yet give it a good score.
Yeah.
Like,
it could have
if all this stuff
amazing
was
video
fantastic.
and audio, but your control inputs just don't work.
That's exactly the example I was going to use. If every one of the things we have on that screen was met almost perfectly and control was a 1, you couldn't play it. And it would have a good score because there's so many metrics when you average it out. So,
or if it was made by Bethesda.
Yeah. That they would have a 1 on the bugs and it would be over. If you wanted a great storyline, you just want easy to consume entertainment, choose another film. Yeah, exactly. But you can still quantify. Like, I understand that Piranha 3D is probably going to have a 5 as a score. And honestly, that's probably the score it deserves. But that movie's fantastic.
Yeah,
that's my thought. I love that movie.
Terrible movies are great.
It wasn't even a terrible movie. It was pretty well written. They used 3D really well for its era. I saw it in the theater and was blown away by it. It was way better than I expected. I thought it was just going to be absolutely terrible, hilarious, and it was intelligent, hilarious, terrible. They knew they were terrible and they used it well.
They were self-aware.
Yeah,
and,
the second one was
goes
bad.
Back to the writing conveyance.
Yeah. The second one was terrible. They missed. They missed on that one, but the first one was great. Watch Cat People. Straight up B movie. Okay, I'll check it out for you. Let me write this down. Here, I'm gonna put it right here for when I save this. Watch Cat People. There you go.
Aren't they remaking that?
I have no idea. Well, I don't even know what it is.
I think I'm mixing up with something else. I think Disney's making some. Yeah, it's completely different.
Yeah.
Ooh,
okay.
No.
I was a little put off for a second. I'm like, is this the movie I'm thinking about? But thankfully not.
Um, okay, let's consistency. I'm fairly happy with these, so let's take a game that you're skeptical about and try to rate it with these and see what happens and see if we can work out something. Trial and error.
Sure. So what's something that we've been playing recently? Well, you and I have been playing 3. Pseudo, I don't know if you've gotten a chance to check it out yet.
Sorry, which game? I missed that.
BL3.
Borderlands 3.
No, I have not.
Nah.
I did play a bit of 1 and 2 though, and I saw the game putting them.
It's very much more of the same. It would be nice if it was something that we had all played through, though. What have you been playing recently, Pseudo?
The most recent would be Outer Worlds, so I don't know if you guys have gone around to that yet. A multiplayer game I played recently was The Last Remnant. I'm not sure if you guys have gotten a chance to play that.
I did try it out very shortly, and I have some opinions. So I'd be down for doing Last Remnant.
Cool. Yeah,
I haven't played it, but I'm down to listen to this. I'm the scorekeeper here. Let's hear it. Mechanical cohesiveness. How well did the mechanics lend to the world they were creating in the story?
I will start with this. For people who haven't played it, it's your kind of typical third-person Unreal Engine shooter. The mechanics-wise and controls are actually very smooth. The gameplay was fairly fun. Basically, you have active abilities with cooldowns, and you just have typical guns. You know, like a long-range gun, machine gun, submachine gun, pistols, and stuff like that. All the different kind of behaviors behind them. I found that to be done actually fairly well. I played in this. You could only play in groups of 3 was the max party size, and I found that there was enough diversity that there wasn't just one class or one combination of guns that was ultimately the best that everyone just kind of rolled with. The next thing you know, it's just 3 clones running around kind of stomping things.
Mm-hmm.
However, it was kind of a bit repetitive. You did it had RNG weapons, but I mean, there wasn't anything that was like.
Well, let's just stick to mechanical cohesiveness first.
Sure. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Like control wise, it was solid. It felt like a solid game that played well. I was never frustrated. If I died or anything, it was my fault, not the game's fault. It didn't get in my way and make me screw up. It felt.
So what would you give it for control? We can do out of 10 for now.
Yeah, with numbers, right? Because it comes to a personal bias, and I'd give it at least like an 8.5 to a 9, just based off controls itself.
So what does that number mean?
Yeah. See, each number needs to have a justification, basically.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Because like I say, it comes with a bias, right? And to me, it wasn't anything new, and for a game for me to have a 10, because when I personally kind of review games, and I think about them, 10s to me are games that tried something new, did something really well that was new, and kind of changed things up. That's to me as a 10 is like a kind of like a golden moment in games. Like this did something new, it did it fantastic. This is a 10. This is how things are going now.
That's fair. Let's. Okay, yeah, I actually kind of like this.
Yeah, definitely didn't do that.
10 was something new, not before done.
Yeah, like game changing, I guess, like genre changing, defining
without
moments.
Errors.
Yeah, like
you can. It was the first time trying it, and you fucking nailed it. Good job.
Yeah, that's why I always kind of thought 10s would be different from like a game can come along and be a 10, and then a game that completely copies it and gets it like basically the same stuff over and over. It would then to me would be like a 9 because it's good, but it wasn't anything new. You didn't change anything up. It's just what is now kind of become the standard. So back to this game, I'd probably give it like 8.5 to 9 for controls. They were kind of just the standard third-person controls. Nothing too fantastic.
Give me one. 8.5 or 9.
We'll go 8.5.
Or do we need to be more granular?
Yeah.
Maybe it needs to be an out of 100 scale.
I am a big fan of larger scales. I really am.
I mean, 8.5 is technically just 85 anyway, so.
Yeah. The 10 scale can be worked as a 100 scale and is easier to read for the average person.
So as far as control goes, you would say that that's like an 8.5. It's fine. It didn't really excite you, but you didn't have to fight it.
Yeah, it just kind of worked. You jump into it. You didn't have to spend any time kind of doing anything. It just kind of, you jump in, you play. It feels smooth. Doesn't cause you any problems. It doesn't really do anything to kind of excite you too much with it. It's just solid.
Interesting, because the way I perceived Remnant was much more of like a sort of it's okay. It's not great. It feels a little too floaty. Like the world doesn't quite connect when you're giving inputs. One of the things I noticed was that run cycles didn't necessarily always sync up with your movement, which was very frustrating to me, and it sort of took me out of the game. But it wasn't offensive. Like, it wasn't offensively bad, but it also wasn't good.
A little
I would
muddy.
say, like, on this scale of 10 is like transcendent, where it's done something new and just, oh my god, all games should be done like this in the future, when people figured out that the right thumbstick should probably control the camera. Like, that was pretty important.
Moving from the arrow keys to WASD.
Yeah, also very good.
Yep.
I would say that on this scale, it's probably a 5 for me. I didn't have to fight it, but it didn't feel particularly good.
Not very sharp. Kind of muddy.
Yeah. Although, depending on what this scale is, because we haven't defined what this scale is entirely.
And that, I think that's something that is maybe missing more than anything for the game review world, is what do their scales mean?
Well, and then you get into the whole problem of consistency between game reviews, and that's why I don't like numbers.
I agree, but okay, so if we're doing away with numbers, we can at least all agree that this current 10 pages of paragraphs to review the game, where I tried to read some of one of them, and it was talking about how the maps transition between each other, and I was instantly like, I don't care. I couldn't give a shit about what you're talking about right now, and I have no intention of reading the rest of this review, so I never intend on trying this game.
And it is definitely something that can be overdone, but like,
that's why I think a justification
is a paragraph about mechanical cohesiveness and a little chart that has like pros and cons.
Yeah, that's one thing I did see that I wanted to bring up on a few of the pages I looked at, was a little pro-con chart. Pros, cons. I think 4 or 5 points, 5, 6 points. Could you replace the rating with a tiny pro-con chart on each one of these? Chart, yep. I need a chart. Give me a chart right now.
I'm chortling. I think yes. It's something that is digestible, gives you context, and is something that you can really boil your points down into. Like, most of the stuff under gameplay, for instance, like, you could have just an overall pros and cons of mechanics were cohesive, controls were good, unfortunately a lot of RNG, and some bugs. Positive, negative.
Yeah, that could even work. I was thinking maybe 3 or 4 points instead of a score for control. What did you like about the control? What did you dislike about the control?
And that would be in the more in-depth control section, which would be, a paragraph or two explaining how things were, how you were able to interact with the game. And then that would have its own little sub pro and con chart.
Okay, this is going to be terrible.
Oh, we're whipping out paint.
And not only that, I'm grabbing the two pencils and I'm using my. But we're gonna wireframe this up a bit here. So we've got like you get to the page and here's your little box of information right at the top with pros and cons, and then you've got your basically here, mechanics, control, RNG, bugs, sorted.
Just an overall for the game.
Yeah. Um, the only thing I feel deserves a brief write-up is story.
That is an interesting statement. I would like to hear your reasoning.
It's there's so much that can make a story good or bad. So many little things and varied things, and just a short write-up on story. Also, story is one of the most important things to a game to me. You've got to have something.
It depends on the game, unfortunately, though, right?
I guess that's fair.
If you're going to include in games like, Fortnite and PUBG kind of games don't really need them. Racing games typically don't need it. Like most multiplayer games that are like competitive don't typically really need a story.
Oh, I see. I'm deleting right through. I need to paint white. And this is why I need other people's opinions. Turns out, I'm not always right. Go figure.
Yeah, as it turns out, other people have valid thoughts.
Yeah.
Who would have thunk it?
Yeah. Yeah, and actually a lot of the games that I play are base building games, which don't really have a lot of story either. I love Factorio. Put way too many hours into that.
I would say that story is important. I do agree with that.
It's one of the it's one of the harder
not,
to quantify, is why I was saying a little more to write up.
Yes, and it's also something that not every game needs.
Yeah. So we start with that and then break into.
Then we would break into like a larger category. So like gameplay would be our subheading number 1, for instance.
I'm totally down with that because that is essential to every game. That was pretty damn good. Pretty happy with that.
And keep getting pretty good with that mouse.
Dexterous wrist control.
So this would have its own pros and cons chart, which would be
yeah, and then it would have. Well, then this would be based on the mechanical cohesiveness, control, RNG, bugs.
Yes.
But I thought that's what this is up here. Pros and cons of mechanical cohesiveness, control, RNG, bugs, audio design, voice acting.
So like I'm going to use a programming analogy. Git's tree model.
Yep.
Your root node.
Yep.
Is the whole thing.
Yep.
That's your first pros and cons.
Yep.
You then have a branch on that tree.
Yep.
Which has its own pros and cons, which is gameplay. And it has a summary of all of its sub branches.
So is this one doing the pros and cons of the mechanic cohesiveness? The pros and cons of control?
This one would be doing the pros and cons of gameplay. The first pros and cons node is the game overall. Is the gameplay good? Yes.
Okay, so this one has the same information as this one does, duplicated, with a little write-up.
But with more detail, more granularity.
So like
if you go
justification, basically.
You go into your review,
yeah.
It says, hey, this game has good gameplay. And you want to go, okay, what's so good about that gameplay? Go down to the gameplay section. You have another chart there that has the mechanic cohesiveness is great. The game makes sense. Your controls are very sharp.
Okay, so this top one is actually smaller than what we've been talking about. Because I was saying it would have that information on it. So this is really just 4 pieces. pros and
Yes.
cons of gameplay, audio, video, writing. This is the 90s review here.
Yeah, these are your check marks. Is it good or no?
Okay, and then this brings in these. So is gameplay in the pro or con? So this is gameplay. So this line is that box. Can you even see that very well there?
Not terribly well, but
It looks like it's getting all
I get the
chopped up
point.
by the...
Maybe use a different color
I was actually just going to zoom it in.
or that. So like in your 90s era, is it good or not?
Yeah.
Section. You have your
Gameplay would be written
gameplay,
here.
thumbs up. And then you go down to the gameplay section and it tells you what's good about the gameplay.
Mhm.
And then you drill down further
Well,
into those individual subsections that we have written out, like
this is just another point list here,
mechanic
right?
cohesiveness.
Gameplay is another point list that
Yes.
just has mechanic cohesiveness, control, RNG, and bugs.
Yes.
Unless we come up with more topics now that we've got this lovely structure we're figuring out.
Yes. And then those subtopics, you can keep drilling down to get more information if you want it. And say, you know, in the gameplay section, it says there are a few bugs. It's not great. And you want to know what those bugs are. You want to know if they're going to be game breaking, like when Fallout New Vegas first launched and you couldn't have a save file. Like, that's pretty important.
Or four corners.
So,
Or
you
what,
know,
sorry,
you
Pseudo?
would dig down into the bugs.
Then you couldn't have a 4-core processor when that game launched.
Yeah.
That's good information to have.
That's pretty important. You would want to know that. And having the subsection beneath gameplay of being able to go in and get context on what bugs are there,
Well,
and you know maybe it only affects some users.
how important is this information? Would you do gameplay here and then do this one here? And maybe do all the larger ones and then drill down deeper? Or would you want to drill down to this one right away?
I would say cover. Like I was just trying to describe the tree model
Yeah,
that
I
I was thinking
understand.
of. But I think like overall, and then broad strokes for everything,
Yeah.
and
Okay.
then details for everything, with some sort of reasonable table of contents.
Yeah, ideally it's not too long, like 1 page.
Yeah,
Be able to view all the information within a glance. I wouldn't want to be scrolling for days and days and days just to see the data.
exactly. And if you just want like an overall idea of if this game is any good, you can probably see it within the initial browser load.
Yeah,
Like,
and it's all point notes, so it's glance digestible.
exactly.
To expand on that, I really like that idea of the kind of the tree structure, because it could also be utilized in a way where the actual consumers can go to the depth that they really want to from a consumer basis. If it's just like the top level, that's all they really care about. But if someone wants to drill down all the way to the end to get to the really nitty gritty, each kind of section of the game and the full detail around it, or if they want the kind of mid level of kind of not so much just if it's good or bad, or I kind of want a general idea of why it's good or bad. If I don't really care about how the map transitioned, but like the overall feel of each kind of thing, it'd be kind of nice to allow someone to kind of drill as deep as they wanted to, and how much depth they actually do care about themselves.
Yeah, I think what is being flagged at the top will also trigger different people to dig deeper. If it's something that you particularly care about in a game and it got a con, you're gonna be like, I really want to know what's going on with this and why it was bad in this game.
Or the vice versa. If it's something you really care about and it's called out in the top header as being really good, you might want to go learn more about it.
Yeah. I know. I agree. I think this slight change to the data presentation in itself is great, and it gives us a new approach to even how we're doing this, which is why we wanted to do this in the first place.
And it doesn't involve numbers, so you don't have scaling issues.
And you can still rate them against each other by how many pros and cons they have, and did they meet all their check marks, and things like this. You can search for games. you can even search for games through a database of games where you can filter out the things that, they don't bother me that much if they're bad, or
Yeah, say you don't particularly care if it has a bunch of RNG in the game. Just say, let's not care about filtering on that category, and then you'll get maybe some more RNG heavy games, but that have something that you really do care about, like say writing conveyance, and they do an excellent job at that.
Yep. Yep. And there's certain categories like Control that those games are just exiled to the waste bin. And that's already what happens to them. They just keep coming up in people's searches because they don't realize that there's bad control in them until they try it and throw it away.
Yeah.
I mean, there is a landfill full of ET cartridges.
That is a true statement. Oh, that poor
that
game.
game did well though.
Oh, it did really well for 2 days.
And then it did really, really poor.
Yeah, they made lots and lots and lots and lots of copies for it because they thought it was going to be the biggest thing ever, and they launched it right at Christmas. And because they launched it at Christmas, the game was built by one person at the time, and they're like, "Hey, we need you to be done by Christmas." He was like, "No," but they made him do it anyway. He released it in just the most atrocious state, absolutely atrocious state. I've played it. I wasn't sure what I was playing at the time, but I have played it.
So very similar
Later
to,
on, somebody explained what was happening in the game to me. I was like, "Oh!" Try it.
I would say that's somewhat similar to the Virtual Boy experience.
I loved my Virtual Boy. I had fun with that thing. But all I really played was the Star Fox ripoff and Mario Tennis.
No, not Mario Tennis. Mario's Tennis.
Mario's Tennis.
Different game.
Yeah. It was great though. It really was.
Did you know that game actually has latent multiplayer code in it that actually works?
Works?
Yeah, it's functional. There's a ROM hack that turns it on, and somebody actually built a link cable for Virtual Boys out of 2 Game Boy link cables, so you can actually multiplayer with your Virtual Boys.
That is
super
That
cool.
is a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful hack. I would want to try this if it wouldn't destroy my eyes.
Or if, you could find working Virtual Boys.
I got that covered.
Yeah, there's I have a good friend of mine who's a Virtual Boy, and we got a dev part for it. We're hoping to screw around with that soon. But there's a really, really good homebrew scene for it, and you'd be kind of amazed with what people are actually doing and how much there is, and the actual games that they're making that are actually like pretty quality. There's even there's a few published game engines for it, all open source that are. It's surprising. It's actually kind of cool.
You've blown Rage's mind. I can see it.
I am flabbergasted.
There's a fighting game for it. I can't remember the actual name of it. I'll find a link for it and put it in the chat. It is actually.
Was it the Street Fighter ripoff?
No. It's like a first person robot fighting.
What?
Yeah, I'll put in the chat right now. I think I found a video of it. But my buddy has it, and I played it, and it's like, this is actually solid. I mean, like, your eyes hurt after a bit, and for like...
You got like 50 minutes of playtime, and then you gotta stop.
He's got terrible eyes, and he directly blames the Virtual Boy for it. He played it a lot as a kid.
And there's a good chance that is the case.
Yeah. That thing was a ton of fun,
I think
though.
we've gone sufficiently
we're
off topic.
way off topic here, but with this new style in mind, can we think of a deeper breakdown of these points then? Would you change this with this new approach in mind?
I think we have a fairly holistic view of a game. in a sort of measurable fashion with what we have at the moment. Mechanical cohesiveness sort of fits in a bit with writing and like world design, but it's something that is very important.
Yeah,
You
well,
know,
it's also
your
viewed.
mechanics should support the world that you're in.
It's also viewed from the gameplay side on this one.
Yeah.
Right. So we're really looking at how the mechanics all work together. In my mind, on that.
Yeah, for sure. And you, as you've said a number of times throughout this stream, having some sort of description or rating of the controls is incredibly, because if you've got a wonderful game that controls like crap, like unfortunately Last Guardian,
Yeah.
it kind of ruins the game for you.
hmm hmm But there are still a lot of people that sought out and wanted to play the Glass Guardian and played it despite knowing it had bad control ahead of time because it was so beautiful and there were so many pros to everything else.
Yeah. And the story in that game is so well done. Oh, so good.
Exactly.
Is there anything else on the gameplay side of things that anybody, including chat, can think of that would be something that you would want to see in a review? Crickets. I think we did it.
Yeah, I mean, did we nail this? Have we cracked the game review world in half and just fixed it?
Well, I think we've at least done it for gameplay. Maybe chat has some words for us on audio, video, or writing.
They are a little thin. They are a little thin.
So let's move on to audio then.
Yeah.
Audio design.
Where's the storyline? I think that's really in the well. I mean, yeah, that's fair. It's something people want.
Yep.
Story.
It's something that not every game will have,
Not
but I
every game
don't
will
think
have, but it's
to
not
be.
just because you get a negative mark against your game for not having something doesn't mean your game is a bad game. You didn't want to put it in there. That's fine. But when people come to review it, they still want to know that it's not in there.
Or is it something that we only would want mentioned, like Nariel says, that it's if it's a game that needs a storyline.
No,
Like
I think you would want it in
Tetris
there
not
always.
having a story shouldn't be a mark against Tetris.
No, and that what I just finished
Not
saying
having
is
a story.
getting a red mark in the review isn't a red mark against your game. It doesn't make your game bad. But if I come to review puzzle games and this puzzle game has a story and this one doesn't, the review should be able to reflect this, and I should be able to separate them based on this.
That's true. So at a high level, there would be a check mark, like sort of, does it do it or not?
Yeah.
Does it have a story?
Yeah.
Is it a functional story?
You're probably not going to drill down into the nitty gritties of the details of it. Did the story get a red mark or not? It's probably not going to happen on those games, but I still want the information there because
Yeah.
I have played puzzle games with stories and I enjoy those. Those are way more fun to me. It adds an interesting depth to the puzzle game.
Whereas, I've recently been playing and watching a puzzle game on Switch that literally has no story. And it's been great. Been enjoying it a lot.
What game?
I can't remember the name of it, but it's a free to play Switch game, and we've been checking it out and bought a couple of level packs for it.
I was going to give this free to play game a shout out, but we don't remember the name of it.
Yeah, literally can't be done. Can't do it.
But yeah, no, storyline, and it's, well, I mean, conveyance is sort of a point within storyline, so I think conveyance goes away if storyline
Colors
comes in.
in. Nariel's got it. Chat's got my back. So storyline is definitely something we want to have under the writing column.
Yeah, yeah. It almost
I think we should still have like cohesiveness and ability to evoke the desired emotion somewhere in there. I don't know what heading that would have.
I think if the game is able to evoke an emotion with its story, I'm giving the story a green check, and in the explanation for why I gave it that, I'm saying it manages to evoke emotions. Because not every story has to be able to, but if they can, they're special.
And if they desire to.
Yeah,
Like,
if they went out of their way to
Bulletstorm, for
try to do
instance,
that. Yeah, it
did
has a
not
story.
have a horribly story. It had a story.
It was an enjoyable enough
good.
story. It was
fine.
a reason to keep shooting things.
Yeah,
But,
it's great.
you know, it's called Bulletstorm. You got what you expected.
Yeah.
It was
Okay,
all over
so
the place.
that can sort of be condensed into the storyline. I would say, however, that say character writing
Storyline
cannot
and
be
character, yeah.
condensed.
I
Cannot be
totally agree
condensed
with
into
having a
storyline.
character. Why do these keep changing? No, not 1026. Do your job. Thank you. Yeah, character. Character can definitely be summarized under writing. How, you know, there's so many ways you could approach character, but were the characters good or not is essentially the crux of it. Like Chrono Trigger characters were brilliant.
Probably some of the best written character out there.
Flushed out. There's enough characters that you make some choices when you're setting up your team, but not so many characters that they can't go into depth with their stories and backgrounds.
And just so incredibly well told.
Yeah.
Okay, what else are we missing under the heading? Hey, FF8 was trash, but it was great trash.
FF8 was saved by its minigame. Triple Triad for life.
Triple Triad's music, specifically.
For
Oh.
writing.
Well, every
setting.
FF game, for the most part, has extra characters, especially closer to the end and stuff, that they can't go into too much detail on. But I think the biggest thing on FF8 is that they failed to go into the characters too much. They spent too much time trying to explain the alternate version of your main character.
You're not wrong. But Pseudo, I think you had something that you were just about to add.
Yeah, saying for writing, something that doesn't really fall too much under, I guess, storyline and character is setting, and how setting can be written. Because not all games do that just through art style. Sometimes it's like Bloodborne's an example. If you go through and you read most of the setting for that game, and you don't really hear it from characters themselves or dialogues. It's kind of just the actual writing just into the objects themselves that you find in books and other stuff like that.
Very true. Is that something that we want to sort of expand to say world building?
I think that's a
'Cause I
better
feel like
term for it.
There's definitely audio and video components to world building, but I would say that it is part of the writing.
Yeah, at its crux, it is a writing thing. The when you're doing world building, it starts with a bunch of guys writing stories. And then those stories are given to artists and audio guys who get the feel from the story and recreate that way. Definitely starts with your writing. I actually like that a lot more already.
So we've got a couple more things under writing now.
I think
Do
video.
we have any other submissions from chat? Perhaps Pseudo had an addition. We've done some refining on what we had already.
As much as I hate to say it, I think we should add more to video.
Technical competency, perhaps.
Oh.
It is actually very important. as I was telling you guys earlier, with my frustration with the new breakpoint.
Yeah, for sure.
Not optimized at all in the video setting. Like gameplay and stuff wise, it seems solid, but I mean, like, if it can't get more than 30 frames on a modern gaming computer, then it's an issue. Something I would have definitely liked to know before playing it. Glad I got it free with the graphics.
That affects control, because now the system is lagging and stuttering and skipping, and that's going to lag, stutter, skip your input, affect your ability to respond to events. It throws off all the timing in the game.
Yep. Is that necessarily under video?
That's what I was just thinking too. I mean, my developer brain goes right to video and performance together, but I think this is more the artists than the developers.
I think video does have a like performance video wise, like actual what you see and how that's performing is important as important.
Sorry,
Yeah,
I don't know if it
the
would go anywhere
rendering
else because like it does affect the other areas, like you said, as controls and gameplay. But I do think it's like it's not like they went out with this gameplay intention of having it choppy like this. I think it's just the game can be designed well, the controls themselves can be mapped well, but then on the implementation level, on the engineers for that part of the system failed, and then therefore it's like that.
Yeah, that's totally fair. Something that I know a lot of people disagree with me with, but I think is very important, and sort of a shout out to my boy Total Biscuit, who unfortunately passed away, is accessibility. Accessibility for the game, the ability to have, say, subtitles or separated audio slider, rather than full on hearing impaired, or tritanopia, deuteranopia, colorblind options. Ability to invert X and Y axes.
You are sounding like a man after my own heart there, Narield. There have been a couple games I have tried to play that I couldn't because they only inverted one axis. I was able to play Halo 1 on the Xbox, and I'm a double inverted.
So where would we put that? Accessibility, I feel like, is important enough to separate itself from control.
I think it should go under gameplay, though. It is a core to everything in the game.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess at its core, it is just the way the game will allow you, or the way it'll grant your ability to actually play.
So that may have been in the wrong section that I brought that up, but it is something important.
No, it is important to have in there. You are absolutely right. Performance under video still?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Like, games can definitely be CPU bound. See the Total War series, but for the most part, the rendering engine is what's going to be the one that impacts performance the most.
Yeah, that's exactly why my dev brain jumped there right away. Yeah, I think that's it for video. We don't want to go too many points either. I mean, I don't think there's anything glaring that we're like, you can't review a game without this. That can't be done.
So for moving on to audio, then I guess.
Yeah, I think so.
For audio, what is there outside of design and technical aspects of voice acting?
Accuracy, like for a lot of first-person shooters and stuff like that are relying on sound reflection and sound origin, things like that, to pick up where a target is without seeing them.
I think that falls under audio design. Though.
Audio design.
One thing that could be, it's not too much on the accessibility kind of thing, but it's also just like what the game actually supports. because depending on the engine, they'll only support certain sound formats, such as like stereo only, 5.1 surround or 7.1, and that's not necessarily in the actual design of the game. That's mostly just same with performance, kind of up to the engineers when they implement the actual architecture of the engine and stuff like that. Depending on the engine they use, how it could be utilized.
Does musical score fit under audio design? I feel like the best game score award encompasses some hugely talented composers, and the wrong music at the wrong time can pull you out of gameplay. I 100% agree with you. 100% agree with you. I actually really want to do an entire episode on game music at some point.
Yeah, that's it's a fantastic thing to talk about.
Score?
I think
score is the right term for it.
Scoring, yeah.
No. You're exactly right. We were missing musical score, and it totally belongs to be in there. And it is actually relevant to pretty much every game. Pretty much.
Yeah.
Even Tetris has a score.
Tetris's score. Ooh, so good. Another example of a wonderful score would be the Doom 2016 soundtrack.
Oh yes.
Any
that game
shooter.
Just gets you pumped
I
trying to
take
play
that
it.
music and I put it on any shooter, and it's fantastic. Other audio things. Another thing that jumps to mind, again with my experience in shooters, is the sound of your actions on the game, namely gunshots or weapon swings, what have you. But I think that sort of fits under audio design for a large part. I don't know. I can't think of anything else for audio.
And it's been the 2 hours that we planned. I think we've done something here, guys.
What about one quick kind of counterpoint for voice acting though? Would voice acting kind of just fit under audio design as well? And if it's not, it's kind of a bit broad, as most games don't really have that much voice acting.
That's fair, but at the same time, I think it deserves to have its own category. And I do still want to know if there's voice acting in a game or not before I play it.
Yeah, but it could also we brought up a lot of other really good points. So basically what I'm trying to say is maybe audio design is too vague to have it there, because there were other good points that we brought up that we would like to see.
Okay,
but we're not going to include them. And then but if we're going to include voice acting, would voice acting be the one to include outside of that, even though it's under the same umbrella, such as Rage brought up, the way that your guns sound and stuff like that. For most people who play FPS, that's probably one of the most important things, because if your guns sound like wet meat slapping against the wall, is just gonna completely ruin the experience for you. But in most games like that, they're not really gonna worry about the voice acting. The voice acting would literally probably just be someone on a radio saying airstrike coming in.
Yeah, that's very true. And I can remember, I forget which game it was though. I think it was one of the Medal of Honor series, that there was the MP40 and the Thompson, and they were statistically the same gun. They handled exactly the same. But the Thompson had a deeper sound to its shots. It sounded more meaty, more violent. And it ended up that they actually had to nerf the audio for the Thompson because it was making people play more confidently and better than with the MP40. So audio is important.
Entirely. I mean, even extrapolating into the real world, there are people that spend tens of thousands of dollars on an exhaust system just to make their car sound a certain way. They'll gain 2 horsepower, but they get that meaty sound. That's what makes it worth it.
So as a more general approach, scoring, voice acting, and sound effects, I think, are fairly good categories.
I agree, but are we now missing anything when we take out audio design?
We're missing sort of the engineering aspect, but I don't know how relevant that is.
Like that?
I think a problem with that too is that's kind of just that applies to each of them individually as well.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think striking sound quality. I think that doesn't need to be there.
Yeah, I did.
I'm sure as we try to actually implement this in tests, we'll come up with things that we're actually missing. It's always harder to kind of eyeball and brainstorm the things out of the gate, but I think as a good baseline, we're pretty good for.
Definitely. Definitely. Um, I'm almost happy with leaving this here. I think we've created something pretty good, pretty special. I think it's different. I don't think really anybody has gone this way that I've ever seen. I think I want to maybe go through a few new games and rate them this way and start building a little bit of a database and see what we actually think of a comparison of a few different games.
Yeah,
Maybe we can all grab, 2 or 3 of our favorite games and do a quick review of them with this system and see how they look side by side.
or perhaps more valuably, maybe we should do them collaboratively. Find something that we all agree on.
Okay. Um, so I think that's it this week for the Games by Design panel. But I think next week we're going to resume with grabbing this that we've made and reviewing a bunch of games and maybe seeing how they look side by side with each other. Plug them all into a wiki. I've already got a wiki set up and ready to go so we can create them and scale them.
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds wonderful.
All right. Will you take chat suggestions for games to review? 100%, as long as I've played it.
Absolutely.
I can't
Although
review
you
something
can
I haven't
assign
played.
homework as long as it's not too expensive.
Yeah, yeah. If it's like an indie game or a cheaper game, I'll even buy it and play it for a later review of it. I'm totally cool with that. But I think that's it for this week from Games by Design. Thank you, Rage. Thank you, Pseudo, for joining for the panel. We'll see you next week. Same time, Saturday, 4 p.m. PST. Bye for now.
Yeah.